What a weird and wonderful time it was, when barbershops became something else. How we woke up one morning and found a beloved king had died. When his daughter was crowned queen. Recall the Festival of Britain and its promise of an exciting future, and how we endured the humiliating retreat at Suez. Still, we did win back the Ashes for the first time in 20 years. And Stanley Matthews won the cup at last. Some of us found love in cool new surroundings, while Tommy Steele sold rock and roll to the Russians. And teenagers up and down the country were just gone, man, gone. Travelling abroad became all the rage, even if some of us were a little too eager to take in the sights. After a spluttering start, the 50s really took off. Returned to those not-so-far-off days when Harold Macmillan told us that we'd never had it so good. After the dark years of the war, and the long years of austerity that followed, it was wonderful to see the lights of London shine again. Other towns up and down the country soon followed. It was the start of a new decade, the halfway point of the 20th century, and our hopes were high. But it was impossible to forget the war and its sad legacy. These children, for example, had all been invited to a tea party at St. James's Palace. It was a special honour for these orphans whose parents had been killed in the war.
It falls to little Frances Richards of Redruth, Cornwall, to welcome Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, whose presence at the tea party sets the seal on all the excitements of the past 2 days.
We were doing our best to put it all behind us.
I am a man of the people.
A junior government minister was an early bird of ill omen for the new decade, when he explained that a worldwide failure in grain crops would mean, yes, a return to rationing.
We are an importing country, and like all other importing countries, have to obtain our supplies from overseas. And therefore, for a time, we must go short.
Sir Ben Smith says we've got to go short. That's what we housewives have been doing for 6 long years. Toast and dried egg breakfasts aren't much to shout about, but now even they're going. Honestly, I'm beginning to dread each new day. I get up wondering what I'm going to give the boys to eat, and the stuff I have to put in front of their father doesn't bear thinking about. I did hope we might have it a bit easier now that there's no more war, but instead of that it's worse. And just when we're getting used to a bit of white bread, back we have to go to wartime loaves. I wonder if the men realise what running a house means nowadays. You can't really know till you've tried it.
It was complaints like that and the spiralling cost of the NHS which had left Attlee's government in trouble. It had scraped home in the recent election and was hanging on to power by its fingertips. Another blow was to come. The news that some of our young soldiers would be risking their lives in a new, unwanted war in a place called Korea. So it was with great relief that the much-awaited Festival of Britain was finally opened by the King. He was in good voice, not a trace of his usual stammer.
The 2 world wars have brought us grievous loss of life and treasure. And though the nation has made a splendid effort towards recovery, new burdens have fallen upon it, and dark clouds still overhang the whole world.
Excited crowds flocked to the opening, as well as some familiar faces. like Winston Churchill.
The King is here.
To be honest, the royal party looked a little dazed by the strange new world that was opening up before them. The Labour government, eager to win back the popularity that had brought it to power, was pinning its hopes on this high-tech vision of the future, a glimpse of a revolutionary modern era just around the corner. Featuring, among other wonders, this 74-inch reflecting telescope, and above it, a roof of reinforced steel that seemed to say, the sky's the limit. The Dome of Discovery, centerpiece of the exhibition, drew big crowds every day, eager for a glimpse into the future.
The skies clear and Thameside becomes a fairyland of lights. The old shot tower becomes a flashing beacon, the Skylon a feather of gold. We have a great story to tell, not of wars and conquests, but of pioneers and builders, of men who lighted the way to a better life. That is the purpose of the Festival of Britain.
Afterwards, the children would hope to drag their parents to the festival funfair along the river at Battersea.
It's full of horrors like the octopus, 2 minutes of whirling bliss and heaven help your tummy. It's amazing how they laugh it up.
Perhaps it was the children who were excited most by this vision of a bright and shiny future. After all, the biggest comic strip of the age was Dan Dare, Pilot of the Future, a very British space hero. This was a fascinating behind-the-scenes visit to the studio of Dan Dare's creator, a genius called Frank Hampson. Frank used real-life models to create the characters for his comic strip. The green mask, by the way, was the inspiration for the Treens, aliens from the planet Venus and Dan Dare's biggest enemy. Frank's son wasn't the only one in the family who helped in these sci-fi creations. His father was the model for the planet controller of the interplanetary space fleet. Perhaps only the British could make science fiction such a homespun affair.
His readers are critical, and the slightest error in rank and insignia are pounced upon by thousands of young space fiction experts. Inspired by these behind-the-scenes ideas, the strip has been running for 6 years and has now become part of the strange little world of Frank Hampson.
Space-age living for adults also seemed tantalizingly imminent.
Just push a button and the foot of the bed soars skywards. Just the thing after a hard day slaving over a hot and fully automatic oven. A tape recorder for the career girl to dictate into, or for the non-career girl, a means of playing hours of soothing music. A vibro massage machine which knows a wrinkle or two, so to speak, and irons them out smoothly. The control panel is a real layabout's dream. It turns out the light, and a quick flick of the wrist ensures that the curtains are properly closed. The designers of this 2,500-pound bed haven't missed a trick. A late night or early morning cup of tea is right beside you. Other refinements, all controlled from the bed, are the mattress heating units, an intercom telephone to all rooms, an outside line, and of course a portable television set at the foot of the bed.
It wasn't just our interiors that were getting such a serious makeover. There were also such things as space-age fabrics.
Very soon, perhaps, we shall be getting dresses that are stain-repellent, water-repellent, and even age-repellent. Husbands might save a lot of money. On the other hand, how many women would want to wear clothes that last forever? Poor things.
But when interior design collided with personal style in the modern age, the results could be disastrous.
A calendar, for example, needs a little embellishment, but a dash of colour works wonders. And the finished creation, worn here by debutante Deirdre Newton-Wolff, is certainly attractive enough, even if it does leak in rainy weather. For smart vegetarians, a salad bowl, with servers too, you'll notice. and simple yet elegant, a funnel hat. Thanks to the ingenuity of one hat designer, the days when diamonds and furs didn't mix with pots and pans appear to have gone for good.
For many of us, these ideas existed somewhere far in the future. After all, in the 1950s, 73% of us were considered working class, and just getting by was a struggle. Although the O'Hares from Liverpool were a special case.
Here's a father who has enough on his plate, and when mealtime comes round, it's a real man's job to see that they get enough on theirs. They're the 16 children of Mr. and Mrs. O'Hare of Anfield, Liverpool, complete with 4 sets of twins. An upholsterer by trade, his income is £7.10 a week, plus 5 shillings per child family allowance, which is, well, work it out for yourselves. And what about mother? She holds what looks like a royal flush of ration books, or should it be a full house? Each week, 9 pounds of sugar, 6 pounds of butter. Each day, 10 pints of milk, 8 2-pound loaves, and 15 pounds of potatoes.
And if sheer weight of numbers didn't get you, then the very air you breathed was likely to. Smog. It was a mixture of fog and industrial fumes that was potentially lethal. In one dreadful week, it caused the deaths of at least 4,000 people.
Every year, railways, factories and private homes exude 2.5 million tons of smoke over England and Wales. New flats without chimneys are part of the campaign to clear Britain's air. Until smokeless fuels are more widely used and gas and electricity play their full part in homes as well as in factories, smog will continue to shroud our cities and to kill. Despite their smokeless home in Lambeth, Mrs. Mitchie and her family are still threatened by smog, which can travel hundreds of miles. Flats like theirs are the first step towards its banishment. Though little Paul Mitchie sets Father Christmas a new problem. Through the door, please, he says, not the chimney. We haven't got one.
Such austerity and hardship meant that the honeymoon was over for the Labour government. Since February 1950, they'd struggled to govern with a tiny majority. In the summer of 1951, it was rumoured that Clement Attlee was about to call an election. We all held our breath as he made the broadcast on the BBC.
The King has been pleased to signify his acceptance of my recommendation that His Majesty should proclaim the dissolution of Parliament on Friday, the 5th of October, in accordance with the provisions of the Representation of the People Act. Polling day will fall on Thursday, the 25th of October.
I think it's the most encouraging news we've had for a very long time. It's essential to the country to have a change of government.
I think it's about time they had a change of government, get the true feelings of the people.
Come on, what's your opinion?
Well, I think this election, I think it'll be a good job when we get the other people in.
I think they've been in power for 18 months and things have been gradually deteriorating.
Now, what do you think about this election?
I don't know nothing about it.
The national health and things like that, it's been all for the good of the working man. I'd like to see them back in again. And I'd also like to see home rule for Scotland.
That particular gentleman's wishes would be denied on both counts. The result would prove one of those national contradictions for which we Brits are famous. Most of us said we wanted to live in the modern world, yet most of us voted for a 77-year-old man. Winston was back. But right now, our concern is with a different kind of leader, King George VI. It's early in 1952, and he's seeing off his daughter, Princess Elizabeth, and her husband, Prince Philip. They're deputizing for him on an African tour because he's still recovering from an operation for cancer. Although doctors say the king is getting better, he looks frail and drawn, and much older than his 56 years. He's been a chain smoker all his adult life. Yet how could we have guessed that this would be the last time he'd see his daughter? How could we have known it would be the last time we would see our king?
It was announced from Sandringham at 10:45 today that the king, who retired to rest last night in his usual health, passed peacefully away in his sleep.
The flag is low as the news spreads. The king is dead. The king, our king, is no more with us. Swift from the press, the news flows to the farthest corners of our island. In our hearts we feel this cannot be.
Elizabeth Alexandra Mary is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become Queen Elizabeth II.
24 hours later, his daughter returns from Kenya. This 25-year-old mother of two is already Queen of Great Britain. The Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, who's an old family friend, is there with his ministers and civil servants to greet her. In the first few months of her reign, this young woman will depend heavily on their advice.
In Hyde Park, they salute the new Queen, Elizabeth, the name that once before spelled glory for Britain.
No one who was in London in June 1953 will forget Coronation Day. Many bought their first television especially for the occasion. The rest of us hunted down a friends or neighbours to watch it all happen live. But anyone who saw it will still have images of a young queen's crowning moment fixed forever in their memory.
I here present unto you Queen Elizabeth, your undoubted queen. Wherefore all you who are come this day to do your homage and service, are you willing to do the same?
Records show that crowded around every available TV set, 20 million people saw the Queen crowned that day. But there was something else in the air, something that the press were calling the crowning glory. By the happiest of coincidences, a British-led team had conquered Mount Everest on the very eve of the coronation. New Zealander Edmund Hillary talked of reaching the summit first.
I think main worry throughout the rest of the actual ascent was the question of the supply of oxygen. We kept constant watch on our oxygen supply and the usage, and even when we were on top, we were very worried as to whether we had enough to get down again. Fortunately, we did.
A mere 4 days after the coronation came the Queen's favourite sporting event of the year, the Epsom Derby, and this time her own horse, Oriole, was one of the favourites.
Accompanied by the Duke of Edinburgh, the Queen waves acknowledgement to the welcoming cheers. Hopes are high that there'll be a royal victory. It's still Shikampur as they thunder round Tattenham Corner, but Gordon's moving up on Pincer. Oriole's well there. It's going to be a terrific battle. Now Oriole moves up to take second place. But it's Pincer's victory, and in comes Gordon to chalk up his first ever Derby win. Too bad that Oriole couldn't quite win for the Queen. But what a fitting reward for the great little Knight of the Turf. He rode a perfect race, keeping his mount back until exactly the right moment, and how the crowd acclaim him for bringing off the greatest classic of them all at long last.
In that golden summer of '53, England would at last win back the Ashes.
And Compton does it.
It had been a long wait.
After 20 years, England had taken the Ashes. Edrich and Compton make for the pavilion and the invasion begins.
And the crowd went wild. The game in England was changing, and for the better. Cricketers were no longer divided into professionals, those who played for money, and gentlemen, who were amateurs. Now we'd beaten the Aussies with our first ever professional captain, Len Hutton. And the sun shone on Wembley for a very special FA Cup final with the great Stanley Matthews, making what would be his last attempt at winning the cup under the eyes of the Queen.
The great little wizard has it again. A flick to centre finds Perry, who crashes it home into the Bolton net. Blackpool 4, Bolton 3. There's no doubt about it now. Matthews, recently ignored by the England selectors, is the man of the match. A royal congratulation for Stanley Matthews, and a winner's medal at long last are fitting rewards for the most dazzling sportsman in world soccer.
We seem to be on a run of British sporting successes. Remember how obsessed we were with a sub-4-minute mile, which no man had ever achieved. Roger Bannister, a doctor of physiology, was using himself as his own guinea pig, running a mile against his only serious rival, the clock.
And Bannister has done it. Though he's out on his feet, his coach and team manager tell him he's achieved his ambition. The mile in 3 minutes, 59.4 seconds. A magnificent win for Great Britain.
Alongside the glory, there was tragedy. A generation of Manchester United footballers were almost entirely wiped out in an air crash in Munich after a European Cup tie in 1958.
Busby's babes, as they were affectionately called, were on their way home from Belgrade when the disaster struck. They were on top of the world. Their 3-goal draw with Yugoslavia's Red Star team had put them through to the European Cup semi-finals. 3 days before, the press had carried pictures of a confident team leaving for Belgrade. Manchester, from the moment the news came through, was a city in mourning. At Old Trafford, the saddest football ground in the world, the flags flew at half-mast. For this disaster is perhaps the most tragic single blow British sport has ever suffered.
If you were young in the 1950s and you weren't on the football terraces, then you'd most likely be in a club like this one, dancing to music just like this, proud of the fact that Mum and Dad neither liked nor understood it, wearing clothes they considered ridiculous, and talking a language all your own. You were that brand new phenomenon, the teenager.
This is us, see? We're today. If you don't dig us, shoot away some square joint to the rest of the creeps. Well, why not stick around and get with it?
Teenagers, guys and dolls, can be trained in a few weeks to earn £8 or £10 a week. The shops know it, so every town has a store with teenage departments, thriving on giving the young people the fashions they demand, distinctive teenage fashions. And if the get-up seems to border on the outlandish, why not look on them as the beginnings of something new?
This new tribe, which had sprung up out of the blue, was just about tolerated by parents, even if they gently mocked some of us for developing romantic crushes on crooners, like Dickie Valentine. But when we became infected by that brash new music, rock and roll, which had blown in from across the Atlantic, they were horrified.
Dig those crazy sailors. Brother, it's cool down there, but not half as cool as the voice of the law, which is positively frigid. Obstruction, he says. Holding up traffic, he says. Just their luck to run into a square copper.
But this benign infection, as we like to think of it, was beginning to spread. Who would have thought that the local barber shop would actually bring in a skiffle group to entertain its customers?
Now this is a story about a girl named Sue, boys.
Hairdresser Leonard Pountney has a latest style skiffle group laid on for the weekend rush, and this the customers do like.
About a little girl named Sue. Well, she loved the country guy, and to get him she would die. Now listen to this song. I'm not gonna keep you long. Listen on, listen on, listen on. When was on the hills one day, when Sue was happy and gay.
Of course, it's all very well for the manicurist to get caught up in the rhythm, just as long as the man with the razor doesn't start jumping about.
And she wished that she was there. Listen on, listen on, listen on. Yes, boys, you made her really worry.
You wiggle and you giggle and you, oh babe, you shuffle and you scuffle and you...
Meanwhile, overseas, a young man who'd started it all, a certain Elvis Presley, had been forced to join the American Army in 1958. The undisputed king of rock and roll would not sing a note for 2 years. But all around the world, his many imitators would keep the flame burning. Musicians like Tommy Steele, the first British rock and roll star, a cleaner, less threatening version of Elvis, was seen at a film festival chatting up a French actress. Tommy was doing what Elvis had done, moving into films, which is why he was here in Moscow. An odd place, you'd think, for a film festival. But the sheer novelty of it, this was at the height of the Cold War, remember, had brought a western tide of cameramen to the Russian capital. Tommy did his mischievous Cockney thing for some rather mystified locals, and then serenaded the passing crowds for an hour or more. And just imagine, there were some of us who thought he and his music would be forgotten in a fortnight. Back home, that incessant rock and roll beat now followed you into the new world of the coffee house, an updated version of the old Lions tea houses, and a great place, incidentally, the secret liaisons. Along with sophisticated new drinks like cappuccinos, there were all manner of exotic snacks. We were developing a taste for foreign food, and some of us were even making it ourselves.
For the benefit of those people who still believe that spaghetti grows on trees, we visit a factory at St Albans, Hertfordshire, where they actually make 32 types of macaroni product. And this, by the way, is the process that puts the hole in the macaroni. To cut the macaroni, as it's squeezed through to the required lengths, a knife is placed at the face of the die. In a matter of seconds from now, this massive Swiss roll affair will have been transformed into daintily folded strands of vermicelli. An ingenious piece of machinery, in fact the only one of its kind in the country. Who knows? At this rate, we'll soon be exporting the stuff to Italy.
And no one did more to promote this new-look cuisine than Fanny Craddock. She could take something as commonplace as the hard-boiled egg, and with a few deft strokes, turn it into a thing of enticing grace.
Simple, isn't it? Although let's hope that most husbands don't mind their pipe cleaners being turned into swans. Otherwise, the feathers will start flying. The wings, by the way, are fixed with Duchess or creamed potatoes. Of course, if you're making a baby swan to look like a chip off the old block, you can use chips instead of creamed potatoes.
Fanny Craddock, of course, would go on to become the first of that infamous breed, the celebrity TV chef. School days were looking different too. How proud many of us were when one of the first experiments in mixed gender and mixed social class of schools was launched. It offered a comprehensive education, and its new ideas were enthusiastically welcomed.
Apart from its attractive architecture, the whole approach to learning is enlightened. To an outsider, the most striking feature, apart from the normal academic syllabus, is the magnificent equipment in workrooms like this. Similarly, in dressmaking and needlework, the girls are no longer bored by the limitations of a few years ago. At one time, embroidery and crochet work were the only outlets for a student's creative ability. Today's class is a real challenge, and the standard compares with the advanced level evening classes for grown-ups. These girls are certainly going to make efficient housewives in a few years' time. The school is actually divided into 8 self-contained houses, each containing a cross-section of the school population, with their own furnished flats, dining rooms, and clubrooms. Another incentive for pupils in the domestic science class is a regular invitation to lunch extended by them to their parents, and as you'll gather, the spread makes a far cry from the old days of unappetizing sausage rolls and rock cakes.
You'll have noticed that although the sexes were mixed at this school, sharp distinctions were still drawn between boys and girls. Even in the late 50s, it was still assumed that a woman's natural place was in the kitchen, and learning how to cook for a large family was part of any girl's basic training. Increasing economic independence for these girls would mean that such assumptions would soon be called into question. It was becoming easier for women to find a job that paid a living wage. Just sign on with one of those shorthand typists' colleges, and in less than a year, you'll be able to join a vastly expanding workforce.
50 words a minute is the target. Most girls can reach it. Shorthand becomes second nature as the weeks go by. The fully trained girl will write 100 to 120 words a minute.
Quality, available,
We are very pleased
Tape recorders ease the dictating work.
that the microphone and sound installation that you provided.
Hardest hit by the shorthand typist famine is the famous square mile, the City of London.
Yes, I know. Girls don't like a job in the city nowadays if they can get something in the West End.
The city's become unpopular in typewriting circles since the war. Dingy offices and everywhere so crowded that the lunchtime problem is often how to get served, let alone eat in 1 hour. And when there is time, there are no worthwhile shops to look at. Small wonder that shorthand typists turn away from the congested streets in favor of the new office blocks going up everywhere. And when the good job is obtained, what makes the ideal shorthand typist? Presentable, but not so glamorous that the big executive's mind goes round like a satellite. Nor yet so plain that he envies his colleagues who are away with Asian flu. West End employers get shorthand typists more easily. Here, window shopping's a lunchtime tonic. But everywhere it's the same story. More jobs than typists to fill them, despite the £10 a week prospect at 18. But don't despair, Miss Briggs. Work hard, aim high, and with a bit of luck, you'll get out of the rut.
So much of the 1950s, especially later in the decade, was about dressing up and showing off. And your house, instead of just being a place to live, became an expression of your character and your aspirations. A new profession was born too, that of interior designer, and women such as this were seldom out of work. This latter-day Marie Antoinette had big dreams for her own pastoral idyll. It was a dream that spoke of indulgence, fun, and, as with so much in this decade, a breathless, chaotic, but not too serious mix of old and new. Back in the city, people had their own dreams too. The Soho Festival was setting new standards in what we might have called raunchiness, if the word had been around then. These were the kind of shockingly modern people our parents would have called bohemian. They ate strange foreign food and watched sexy French movies. As the quality of life improved, there seemed to be a lot more of them about.
If there's one side of Soho life which is growing vigorously, it's dancing. Brother, if that don't send you, you just ain't going.
There were new roads called motorways, leading to a new kind of life for people who earned enough to have their own cars in specially built satellite towns. This one was Stevenage, an hour or so's drive from London. Many of its new inhabitants had lost their homes in the Blitz, and this relocation offered them more space and a better life. In fact, it was Churchill's housing minister, Harold Macmillan, who'd overseen this new housing drive, and for many, things indeed had never been so good. As we spread out across Britain from our local neighbourhoods, the communications revolution followed in our wake.
Great Britain will eventually be linked by the dial we now use for local calls. The Postmaster General invited Her Majesty to make the first STD call to Edinburgh, and telephone history was made.
This is the Queen speaking from Bristol. Good afternoon, Lord Provost.
Good afternoon, Your Majesty. May I express my gratitude to Your Majesty for the honour which you have done to me and to Scotland in making the first call in this new service to me.
Thank you. Goodbye, Lord Provost.
Goodbye, Your Majesty.
The ever-ringing phone would soon become part of the soundtrack of our lives. and it created new problems and ingenious solutions.
How often hasn't this happened to us? The phone always seems to ring when we're doing something like this, or in the bath.
This Lancashire GP, who had a touch of the Thomas Edisons about him, invented this contraption that recorded messages when he was out. But the trouble was, it took up half the house.
Please call at 21 Farmley Avenue to see Mrs. Fletcher. I've upset some hot frying oil over my hand. Will he come as quickly as he can?
But the doctor had really started something. Engineers took up the idea and ran with it. Soon they'd perfected the first compact telephone answering machine. But alas, it was still too complicated and too cumbersome to catch on. Although the odd, very rich person did install his own answering service.
Mr. Brown is not at home, but will you please leave a message? Speak slowly. Speak now.
The cinema had been the centre of entertainment in every high street. But now, with the rise of television, all over the country cinemas were going dark, even if the legends who lit up the screen remained. One such was Charlie Chaplin. The little man who became a giant on the silent screen was back home for the first time in 20 years, with a new wife, Una, on his arm. It was an unforgettable return for the man who gave us the gift of laughter in dreadful times. Later, from the roof of his hotel, Charlie showed his wife the Old Kent Road far off in the distance, where he'd grown up. Later still, the Queen would give our greatest star a knighthood. Some of Britain's famous film studios had been taken over by television companies. Most of the dramas and comedies filmed here were made for television. We produced a crop of talented actors in the 50s, but the most successful had either, like Chaplin, left for the greater glory of Hollywood, or, like Jeanette Scott, were waiting for the offer. Television offered us a new type of celebrity. This was a BBC experiment into the paranormal. This plane, taking off from Bristol, had Leslie Piddington on board, one half of a double act that claimed to practice telepathy. Her other half, husband Sidney, was many miles away in a broadcasting studio in London, with a panel of judges to monitor this extraordinary event.
Yes, we are here, still gaining height. I'm moving even further away from Leslie Piddington. And here is Jean Gordon, a stewardess. What did you do to Mrs. Piddington a few minutes ago?
I searched her very thoroughly in spite of the cold. I made her take off everything. I looked in the padding of her jackets. I looked in her boots. I even looked in her mouth and her hair. And now I have her handbag, so I think you can be sure she's nothing hidden away anywhere on her person.
Well, here we are still rocking about. And back to you, Sydney, in Piccadilly.
Just before we crossed over to the Shadow Cruiser, I asked all of you in the studio here to write something down or to draw a picture or provide something to be used later in this program. I also asked you to insert those, whatever they may be, in numbered envelopes which were issued to you as you arrived in the studio this evening. And the enclosed contents will form the subject to be transmitted to Leslie. Is that all clear?
The subject to be transmitted is chosen at random, and Piddington first hears of it from one of the judges. Can he transmit it to his wife?
Will you get Leslie to stand by right now?
Will you stand by, please? She is now standing by.
I can't make sense out of it. Oh, it's two lines. Bird, spirit. Hello. Oh, I've got it. I can guess it. Hail to thee, blithe spirit. Bird, thou never wert. I think that's very nice. In fact, whoever thought of it? Hail to thee.
Hail to thee, blithe spirit. Bird, thou never wert.
By the way, it was a conjuring trick. If TV and our own naivety could sometimes make us believe in the impossible, then at least the football pools could still make dreams come true. Yorkshire miner Edwin Midgley had been on £8 a week until he became one of the decade's big winners with a £16,000 scoop.
Yes, I had quite a nice win on the pool, £16,000, and I feel now that I ought to go back to work and keep what I've got invested for a rainy day. We've got a lovely home, and I'm quite happy and satisfied. We can't want anything more, and I think that's about as much as I can do now.
Edwin could have picked up half a dozen smart little cars at the Earl's Court Motor Show if he'd wanted. A rising standard of living was turning us into a nation of owner-drivers.
About 40 brand new models are on show, including the Jensen 541, which has an all-plastic body and can clock a good 100 miles an hour. On now to the Lanchester Sprite, the first British car to do away with gear changing. Here's the Rolls-Royce Silver Wraith, perhaps the most graceful and precision-built car in the show. Its price? A mere £7,034.
There were now something like 5.5 million cars on our roads. One of the latest models, the Mini, was something we laughed at when we first saw it. But the laugh was on us. This toy car, as we called it, would burn along those newly built motorways, delivering wonderful performance at unrivaled economy. And it cost just over £500. Ah, those were the motoring days. The open road really meant what it said, and a traffic jam was something you saw only in American movies. And then quite suddenly, we were reminded that this carefree motoring was costing us too many lives, more than 8,000 a year. The road toll had become so serious that the government had to introduce a new traffic code. After that sobering thought, it's time for a holiday. And what a boom time for holidays it was. Transport links had greatly improved, and so had the food and the accommodation. We were able to explore the lovely beaches of Devon and Cornwall in ever greater numbers. It was a challenge to the big resort towns. In Brighton, they played the glamour card. Young women were hired as tourist guides. They were called the promettes, and allegedly they all spoke several foreign languages.
Whatever the question, the customer is always right, even when he's wrong. One final rule, no dates. Come to think of it, it's not worth going to Brighton after all.
But in the 1950s, there were endless solutions to the yearly conundrum of the family holiday.
To some, it is a panic-stricken rush to the railway station with bulging suitcases. To others, it is a car crammed with buckets, spades, and fretful children. But to many a modern young couple, the trip seems to be simplicity itself. In a matter of moments, the trailer and dinghy are in position, and the family transport is all ready to go. And in case you're wondering why a dinghy needs a streamlined trailer, we should explain that it's really a collapsible caravan, believe it or not. The caravan, built at Emsworth, Hampshire, is not complicated. Even a moron, mechanically speaking, can fix it up in a matter of minutes. And it provides comfortable accommodation for 2 adults and a child. 4 retractable legs provide a firm base for the caravan and prevent it from rolling inadvertently out to sea in the middle of the night. Although we dare say it would make a fine houseboat too.
Leaving the other stick in the mud stuck to the caravan site, we're all set for a day on the River Lee at Broxbourne. No need to drive right into the river. The otter can be launched quite simply from the side of the bank. All you need are 2 sets of muscles. So without the usual ceremony, Alan and his friend Ron Sams, who built the amphibian, prepare for the launching. If you're contemplating regular river holidays in this fashion, a bottle of champagne each time can be expensive, so Alan and Ron get used to launching her without the usual trimmings. On board, a few final touches make her seaworthy, or rather river-worthy, for despite her unsinkable appearance, the otter isn't cut out for ocean crossings. But if you want to relax, this is the way to do it.
there was one more holiday barrier to be overcome, and that was our general suspicion of anything they did or ate on the other side of the channel. This was a very significant experiment. A day trip to France offered to ordinary holidaymakers.
Tomorrow someone will ask you where you were yesterday, and you'll say, ever so casually, I nipped over to France for the day just for a change of scenery, you know. If you're a bad sailor, you'll be in good company. Then before you've had time to say mal de mer, there'll be land ahoy. A foreign land, France, yet so close to our own country that a passport really does seem a most absurd formality. As you step ashore in France, you may be thinking that the Frenchmen on the quayside could just as easily be Englishmen. And then you discover that you can hardly understand a word they're saying. They're different, after all, you find, and so is this way of spending the day. On the beach, it's the same old sun that shines down on Blackpool, but there's something you can't pin down that makes it just that little bit different. Maybe it was the wine you had with your lunch.
An encounter with exotic liquor and exotic flesh seemed to do the trick. Brigitte Bardot, or at least someone very like her, seemed to be everywhere. Whilst we were welcome on the continent, we were less popular in other parts of the world. And one word sums up our deepest humiliation of the decade: Suez. Our troops, sent there to keep the strategically important Suez Canal open for our ships, had been forced to leave because the Egyptian leader, Colonel Nasser, said so. And the Americans, who were still paying our bills after World War II, said in so many words, "Clear off, Brits." So we did. It was our new Prime Minister, Sir Anthony Eden, who'd succeeded Churchill in 1955, who sent our troops into Egypt against the wishes of his own Foreign Office. Now he was paying the price for failure.
Thank you very much for all your kindness to me, all of you, during my period of office. I wish my successor all good fortune, and Godspeed to you all. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
His successor, Harold Macmillan, would surprise us all. He looked an old fogey, but his eye was trained on the future. This was the future Macmillan saw for us, a country that still treasured the glories of its past, but one that must now harness the genius of its scientists and travel ever faster towards a more technologically driven and very different future. Sometimes, though, the future comes at a price.
When the 36-seater jet-propelled de Havilland Comet opened the latest act in the drama of man's conquest of the heavens, the eyes of many nations were focused upon it.
The record-breaking Comet, the world's first jet airliner, helped to create a sense that Britain was really on the move.
On Rome's Ciampino airfield, 970 miles from London, diplomats and air attaches saw the Comet fly in at 490 miles an hour to lower record to 2 hours and 2 minutes. A proud day for John Cat's Eyes Cunningham, de Havilland's chief test pilot. His achievement proves that jets will enable Britain's future airliners, in mass production by 1953, to do twice the work in almost half the time at 4/5 the cost.
But this pioneering adventure ended in disaster. This airliner had serious flaws in the design of its airframe, and after 2 of them crashed, one on its way to the very same airport, Ciampino in Italy, the project never recovered, and the baton of jet travel was picked up by the likes of Boeing and Lockheed in the States. But if the Comet was a setback, there were still young people continuing to challenge the old conventions. These New Year revelers in the Albert Hall in 1959 were typical of this new generation, eager to throw off the chains of restraint and respectability. They wanted to tear down the old idols. We had a Prime Minister who'd performed a magical balancing act, weighing the old against the new. A man who told us, "You've never had it so good."
Every now and again since the war, I've heard people say, isn't Britain only a second or third class power now? Isn't she on the way out? What nonsense. This is a great country, so don't let's be ashamed to say so. It has a superb record of achievement of every kind. We've been in the lead of industrial and scientific progress, at least since James Watt invented the steam engine, and we're still in the lead in these days of atoms and aeroplanes. Britain has been great, is great, and will stay great, provided we close our ranks and get on with the job.
The decade had begun with food shortages. It had ended with food to spare for a full table. We'd lost a beloved king, but found ourselves a lovely young queen. We'd moved from streets filled with smog to spacious new towns, from dreams of romantic crooners to the sexy beat of rock and roll, from holidays at home to holidays abroad. And now we were speeding confidently towards the future and a new decade that would turn the world upside down.